Everything, including fear, has two expressions, two faces. Yin, or feminine, yang, or masculine. Now, in the dynamic of fear, you have the state, you have the feeling, you have the experience of being afraid, of fear. This is the feminine state. But you also have the environment, the thoughts, the intensity, the specific sensations. You have the system that generates this state, that generates this fear, and this is the masculine face of fear. Now, in order to work with any dynamic, in order to facilitate change, you need to take it from the feminine dimension, because remember, in the largest system that we're dealing with, all human beings want to feel sustainably better and want to avoid feeling chronically worse. So we're trying to change sustainable state. And with that, we're in terms of fear being a symbol, a marker that says pain could be coming. What we're trying to do in order to create less fear and a higher state is sustainably avoid creating as much pain and sustainably generate more phases of well-being. So if we take fear down to its system, fear has an environment. The classic one being you have a nightmare, you're in the dark, you feel overwhelmed, and you turn on the light. Well, you turn on the light, you've changed the expression, you've changed the distinction, the masculine face, and the fear diminishes. So fear has an environment, it has a context, it has a variety of metaphors and sensations. So the first step in working with fear is to turn it into its system or its ecology. So fear has a position in the body. Right now, if I'm feeling fear, maybe there's an area that I'm not breathing. Maybe there's an area where I'm clenching a muscle. So in the body system, to turn fear from this amorphous, I'm scared, into sensation, we take fear into a very specific muscle, into a very particular place in the body. And you say there's a tightness around this big in this area, and then there's this sore, burning part here. There's this feeling that feels like this terror. It's back in my back here. And then there's this hunched over, I don't want to be, I'm expecting to be hit, perhaps. So fear has a physiology, and we locate it in the body. Here is this part of my fear. 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 Okay. Once fear has been brought into its concrete expression in the body, you can now change the expression. You can now adjust and shift the expression out of the body consciously. You can work with massage, etc., but you can also breathe into that area. You can also notice that area of pain. And this comes into the next form of fear. This is another interface for working within the body. Let's say that you've noticed this pit. Let's say you've decided it's the size of a quarter, and it's right here. And there it is in your body. Well, let's say you can't massage it particularly. Maybe you can, maybe you but here's another way of working with it. So now that you've identified a quarter-sized object of fear in this part of your stomach or this part of your back, or it's a feels like a band. You're now going to turn this into an image, which is a way of taking it into masculine expression, a distinction. So you're going to say, what color is it? Like I'm seeing a dim gray and kind of white color right now. Okay. And then you're going to say, does it have a vibration? Well, there's some sorrow. There's a sense of kind of like this. So the fear maybe has to do with feeling sorrow, meaning there's sorrow that I'm afraid of feeling. Well, why would I be afraid of feeling sorrow? Well, for one thing, I'm an emotionally illiterate person in an emotionally illiterate culture. And I'm also in a culture with a lot of pain. So if you're incompetent, in pain, in a culture that is incompetent and in pain, well, there's a reason to have fear, because there's every expectation that there will be more pain again in the future. And I don't want to feel that either, because it's too much pain. So in saying these things, in articulating these things, if there's an ounce of nurturing parent, an ounce of friendship towards the self, towards the culture, then there's a sense of, that makes sense, and that's tough. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that there's been so much pain before. I'm sorry that you're in an environment that is predisposed to pain. It's likely to happen. And I'm sorry you're in a culture that doesn't know how to deal with psychological pain, knows how to suppress them, to block them for periods of times with, various neural uptake inhibitors. But the pain comes right back after stopping, these various basically that shut down parts of the brain that register pain. And this is a little bit like taking the batteries out of your smoke detector. So this area of the brain registers that you're in pain, and so you just block it. The smoke detector registers that there's a fire, so you take the battery out, or you muffle the sound with a pillow. And now you don't have to listen to the screech of a smoke detector, but you've still got a fire. And so this is all very uncomfortable. I don't like feeling this. So now I have a new pain, like there's a new fear coming up around the complexity of all of this. Like that's one of the things that comes up in working with fear as an emotionally, psychologically illiterate human being in an emotionally and psychologically illiterate culture. So I haven't got 10 years of nuanced psychological distinction, practicing it with the family, practicing it with this. I've got a few buckets worth of an ocean of knowledge, and that's, in our cult, above average. Well, that's not encouraging. But so now there's anxiety about all that unknown. And, when I look at that, a lot of that comes into the fact that one of the things that is very hypocritical about our cult is we don't study a day of all kinds of things. I mean, name the day in your life when you got a single ounce of emotional literacy. When did that happen? For one fucking day. I can't find the day in my life where a single competent adult, where a group of competent adults sat down and said, today is your one day to learn about femininity, to learn about emotions. Never occurred. And so it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that from this author and that author and experience and this and that. And then now having performed abominably in the education of emotional literacy, this cult, being the hypocrite that it is, turns around and says, get to the point. What's your point? What is it? In the dynamics of chauvinism, the point is the masculine expression. The circle, the environment, the ecology is the feminine expression. And so getting to the point in a chauvinistic culture is the whole point. It's all about the masculine expression. It's not about the journey. It's not about the pattern or the tapestry. It's not about complexity. It's not about how does it feel to arrive. It's get there now. It's about the end, and the end justifies the means. That's also part of chauvinism. And so you have this dynamic. So then there's a little bit of fear around that. And it's a fear that I feel every time I go into feminine terrain in our culture, which is to go into the pattern, which is to meander around, to not get to the point and focus on the point, but rather to understand the pattern that emerges out of many points. Well, so then there's been a lot of critical, impatient energy received from teachers, from parents, from various sources around complexity and not getting to the point. And as I'm exploring this terrain, the point is not coming into focus as much as the pattern is coming into focus. There's this bit and this bit, and a pattern is starting to emerge. The ultimate feminine expression is that of the mystery, because when we understand that 99.9% of reality is not only unknown, but unknown, meaning we know so little about it, we don't even know that we don't know it. 99.9% of reality, not our little reality, because that's less than 1% of 1% of 1%, but of reality, is known, let alone, it's unknown. And so in this dynamic, to face the largest part of the ecology of which we are a part is to be in mystery, is to embrace the unknown. But this is a very terrifying thing for an emotionally illiterate cult, an emotionally illiterate human being, because the more traumatized and incompetent you are, the more traumatized and incompetent I am and we are, the less we like complexity, the less we like the unknown. And so all of this comes up as secondary fears, and it's one of the reasons we can get addicted to these endless loops is when the culture, for example, shames us for not knowing. That's one expression of chauvinism, to shame the individual for not knowing something. Well, that gets a little bit dumb when the culture doesn't teach what isn't known. I'm not going to teach you this, but then I'm going to shame you for not knowing it. That doesn't add up. That's incompetence. But we have an incompetent culture. We have a schizophrenic abuse culture that sets us up with all kinds of pitfalls, and then tries to pass off the inadequacy of the cult onto the inadequacy of the individual. And it's one of the reasons that so many people at a deep feminine level feel unworthy, feel inadequate, feel that there's something fundamentally unlovable about them because they were raised in an inadequate, ignorant, unloving culture that rather than having the decency to say, look, you're just an infant that could have been raised anywhere imaginable. But we, with all of the power, with thousands of years of technology, we've decided to do this and ram it up your ass. And so you got to live with it because you can't survive, feel secure, have love and belonging. You can't meet your human needs without us. Now, that's pretty obviously factual in terms of take an infant and just hand it out into the ocean or the forest or whatever and remove all humans, and that infant dies 99.9% of the time within days, if not hours. And so you do need the envelope, the protective envelope of a culture, of a group of people working together. And pretty much whatever culture you're born into, that's who you become. If you're born into an English culture, surprise, surprise, you learn to speak English. Now, this is astounding because not only have there been 10,000 languages in human history, there are trillions of languages that could have been invented, meaning there are any number of trillion languages that are part of the possibility field of little mouth noises being used to symbolize concepts and words and ideas that are then turned into pictures that we call reality. And in that whole panoply of infinite possibilities, everyone in our cult speaks English. Well, and you look at infinite possibilities and everyone talking and using the same words for the same things, etc. And it's like, that's a profound level of indoctrination, of influence, of structure. So the fact that you're in a group of men where no one in that group of men knows how to bring up grief competently and teach the others in that group to do so with dignity and honor is not random. The fact that no one in that group of men speaks Japanese, if they were born in America, is not random. It's indoctrinated. It's expected. It's statistical that 99.9% of people will look at this way, will emphasize these values, will talk using these sounds rather than these sounds, will think in these thoughts rather than these thoughts, will use these paradigms rather than these paradigms, and have these routines rather than these routines. So this is the cult system. And in order to change state, you've got to change some parts of that system. So if you're anxious because you feel grief, because you have feelings that have been put aside, and every time you try to take those feelings towards you in order to understand them, so as to feel less grief about dissociating from feelings, you now feel a new feeling of anxiety that I'm being different, I'm individuating, I'm making myself distinct from what? My cult. Men in my cult don't do this. Men are supposed to do this. But there's a grief there, and as I start to respond to the grief, I feel the anxiety, the guilt, the uncertainty, the traumatic fear that I'm stepping away. I'm stepping away from my cult. My cult's over here, and I'm over here. This is the fear of the little girl and the little boy having their own feelings separate from mom. So there's two levels of freedom and individuation. One is the infant separating from the mother, and the other is the individual, the grown-up, becoming an adult by separating from their cult. So you don't become a grown-up when all your feelings are mom's feelings, and everything you do is what mom wants you to do. Mom wants you to take care of her fear and guilt. Mom wants you to lie to make her feel better. Mom wants this. Okay, Mom, whatever you need, I'll look at your face, is what an infant does, and just say yes. You want me to say this or do this or say that and you'll like me more? Okay, yes, I'll do it. that for a grown-up to become an adult, we have to separate from the cult that says all men are like this, all women are supposed to be like this. You're supposed to be ashamed if your breasts are not as big as this person. Who said? It's the cult. We all know. In Africa, you're supposed to be ashamed if you've cut a hole in your lip so that you've got this piece of skin. You put a plate. You put a plate in between this bit of your lip and the other bit of the lip. And the person who has the biggest plate, they've got cult rank. They've outranked everyone. You got a tiny little plate, or you haven't cut a hole in your lip, well, you're nothing. Well, in this cult, it's bits of paper. You have lots of bits of paper. It's called money. Wow, amazing. What's very odd with these cult distinctions is they don't measure your happiness as a felt experience. The cult tells you if you have 3 yachts, $5 billion, 5 homes, whatever it is, a Ferrari, the cult tells you you will be happy and you should be happy. Having announced that all of this will make you happy, when you have it, you are told that you are happy. You're not asked, how do you feel? I feel confused because I thought I would be happy, and now I've got to go run over here to vacuum this Ferrari, and the house cleaner hasn't shown up in house number 1, and there's been a chimney fire in house number 3, and now I've got to go and do that. I'm not happy at all. I'm just rushing around solving problems in all of my things while everyone tells me that I'm happy. This is absolute insanity. It's absolute absurdity. And yet we cannot go from being a grown-up to an adult without differentiating our personal experience and values from that of the cult. This is me, this is my cult, and we are different. There's some things we are the same. I say hello and my cult says hello. But when my cult says, how are you doing? I actually listen to my feelings and give a real answer, and my cult always says, I'm doing fine. That's the cult. How are you? I'm doing fine. It means absolutely nothing. Well, it's a meaningless cult then. It's a meaningless generating cult. My point is that you cannot shift the general anxiety or discomfort. It could be the anxiety, the fear about becoming an adult. Differentiating myself from the cult. Well, when you separate and you have your own feeling, mom is feeling scared and you're feeling angry, as opposed to taking care of mom's fear. Well, maybe mom will be angry that you didn't take care of her. She took care of you. She kept you alive. What if she pulls the plug? You see, the mother gives birth to the infant. The cult gives birth to the grown-up. But the individual is born in the separation from mother. The adult is born in the separation, in the distinction with the culture. And nobody welcomes that distinction. Mother doesn't celebrate and say, you've started to ignore my feelings. Mother doesn't celebrate that. Your cult doesn't say, hello, hurrah, you're now an adult because you've learned how dumb we are, and you're going to actually think for yourself. Your cult doesn't praise the initiation of an adult. We've actually banned and gotten rid of the ceremonies. You know, in most of the tribes and cultures in history, the initiation into adulthood was the most significant and important experience, particularly for a young man. And somewhere in the teenage years, when they were ready to be an adult, maybe 12, 15, 18, somewhere in that range, the child was taken into a completely foreign experience, deep into the psyche. Often this happened in caves. Sometimes incredible pain and endurance was involved. Out in the sun, fasting, thousands of ant bites. Transcending the known familiar egoic state through pain and hallucinogens, through dance, through song, through ritual, through mask, to break out of the dogma of the cult. And in that state of dissociation from the cult, to have a transcendent individual experience that says, this is me. I can no longer remember. I no longer care. I'm in too much pain. The world is too different. These emotions and energies are too strong. I no longer care what's going on out there. All that I want is to find some core within myself that can be with these experiences. And the awareness of the self and the awareness of being an adult, a distinct individual, emerges through a connection with the ecological energy system that is bigger than the cult. It can be called God, the transcendent, the divine, the archetypal, the great geometry, the true physics. It doesn't matter what you call it. It is an energy system that transcends the connection with our cult, a direct connection to the ecology out of which all cults have been born and that we are still connected to. And when we connect with that source directly, with the mathematical code, with the matrix, with the light energy pattern that transcends language, when we connect with that, now we know our place in the multiverse. Now we understand our center. Now we have a grounding point to come back to. Now, in more sophisticated native tribes, they would not trust a grown-up until they became an adult. They would not trust an individual until they'd had a transcendent initiatory experience and integrated it and knew how to come from that center. What is that center? It is the mathematical code of the harmonious, sustainable relationship with the source that transcends language, that transcends culture. It's in a language of centering and attunement and connection, and it's solid. That's a trustworthy individual who will not harm themselves, who will not harm the environment, who will not harm other people, but who may institute reforms and changes in what is becoming a dead cult, an ossifying dogma that no longer brings life to its people. Well, if my fear is coming from this anxiety that I'm a child in a childlike cult that doesn't like adults, that doesn't honor the transcendence, that doesn't honor the divine, that doesn't honor the deep mathematics of physics that it pretends to honor with its rabid materialism, pretends to honor but doesn't. Well, I need to put that into words. I need to understand what that anxiety is all about. I need to go outwards beyond the limited dogma of my sacred books, whether it's the Bible or this or that or mathematics or whatever it is. I need to expand to connect with something that's transcendent. Well, when I do that, the fear dissolves, meaning as I talk about this dynamic through the distinctions of language, all that fear of getting fuzzy and overwhelmed and not getting to the point goes away. So there's a movement from something that's undefined and amorphous to putting more and more clarity and focus on it until a pattern emerges that touches the energy of fear, that touches the energy of underlying pain beneath the fear, and begins to resolve it with consciousness, with distinctions, with the medicine of truth.